welcome to Rebel Fantasy Football. My name is Jacob Stuckey. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about my top 16 running backs. And before we get started, I just wanted to say thank you so much for supporting the channel so far. This has been a really fun process for me, and so I love that there's already been a lot of people who have liked and subscribed and also just gave me really encouraging words, and so I appreciate that. Feel free to share it with your friends, with your family members. Share it with your grandpa who knows nothing about fantasy football. Tell him that a fellow bald man sent him and maybe he'll watch it. But yeah, I really appreciate the support. Keep letting me know down in the comments what you would like to see from the channel. Like I said, I want to make a community that's a fun community that loves each other and can harass each other and have fun with fantasy football. So let me know down in the comments what you would like me to cover in the future. And we'll get started. So today's episode, we are going to be talking about running backs. And running backs is funny. It was a lot harder for me to choose my top 16 running backs than it was my top 16 wide receivers. And I think part of that is because I play in a full PPR league. And for those that don't know, full PPR means point per reception. And so in the league that I play in, and a lot of other people play in them as well, each player gets 1 full point for every catch that they get. So wide receivers, running backs, tight ends, whenever they get a reception or a catch, they get an extra point. And now there are some leagues, standard leagues, that don't have that. They don't have that bonus. So you basically will just get your points based off touchdowns and you get points based off your yardage. But in full PPR leagues, you get an extra point. And so it makes those positions that get a lot of catches, it makes them a lot more valuable. And so generally, I try to prioritize wide receivers because you'll have guys that get 8-10 catches, and that's 8-10 points, instead of a running back who, for the most part, they stay on the ground and they get a lot of rushing yards, which is great. But if a running back doesn't get a lot of catches in a full PPR league, they're not always as valuable as a top wide receiver. Now, that doesn't mean that they aren't valuable, because I do think that with how the running back position is playing out, well, how it played out last year, but then how it's playing out this year, I think that running backs are valuable because there is a strong drop-off between the really good running backs and the mediocre running backs. And I'll explain that in my rankings because I think it definitely shows. So yeah, let's get started. Our first running back on my top 16 running back list is Jonathan Taylor. Now, this is one that if you look around anyone else's rankings, they probably have Jonathan Taylor. He's kind of the consensus number one this year. I think he deserves it. Last year, he finished as the top running back in the league in full PPR and half PPR. So it wasn't just for one format. He definitely dominated the league and he had an awesome fantasy football performance. And so going through my rankings, thinking about who do I want to put number one, it was fairly easy picking him, but there was a couple other guys that I debated about. You'll see it in my next couple rankings for 2 and 3, but Christian McCaffrey is another guy that can really go off. He can really get a lot of points. But the reason why I chose Jonathan Taylor is because he's young and he's healthy. And he's on a good team. The Colts missed the playoffs last year, but just barely. And he was a big part of the reason why the Colts were actually competitive. They now have a new quarterback. They have Matt Ryan, who I'm not as high on as other people. But I think Matt Ryan will actually help Jonathan Taylor because I think he'll look to give him those short dump-off passes. Some people think Matt Ryan is just going to totally ball out and just air it out and go for really long throws. And I don't know. I don't know if I see it. Jonathan Taylor finished as the number one with Carson Wentz last year, who did look for him in a lot of those short dump off throws, which I think is why Jonathan Taylor is actually really valuable, is because he can catch. And in full PPR leagues, you want a running back that will get you at least 40 receptions. Like that's a bonus. And so, yeah, so I'm not worried about Matt Ryan. I think that he probably will go back to looking for Jonathan Taylor in those short throws. which will only help Jonathan Taylor. And the fact that he is a monster, like at the line of scrimmage, like he got over 1,800 yards last year and 20 total touchdowns, which is a lot. And so I think the Colts are just going to continue going through him. He is a big reason why they did so well last year. And the reason why I feel confident with him at number one is because he's healthy. Like he played a full season last year. He's young. He's shown no sign of injury. I mean, it's going to happen at some point, but while he's healthy, you kind of have to like write it out is kind of how I feel. So yeah, Jonathan Taylor, number one. Number two, I briefly talked about him, but it's Christian McCaffrey. Now this one's hard. Even if you haven't been playing fantasy football for very long, you probably know of Christian McCaffrey, and you probably know that he is like explosive in fantasy football and obviously in the NFL. He's just a beast. But the reason why this was so hard for me is because he's always hurt. Like the dude last 2 years has been hurt for a lot of those seasons. But several seasons ago, he finished as the number one, but he didn't just finish as the number one. He like outscored everyone else by a lot. Kind of like what Cooper Kupp did last year is what Christian McCaffrey did a couple seasons ago. And so it's hard for me because I want to believe that he can do that again. And I do believe that he can, but because of his injury history the past couple years, it's hard to fully trust him, which is why I have him at number two instead of number one. If Christian McCaffrey was healthy for a lot of the season last year and he was kind of like showing us what he got, but then he got hurt a little bit and then he stumbled for a little bit last year, I think that'd be different. But the fact that he missed most of the season last year is hard for me to put him at number one. He finished as the 38th best running back last year because he didn't play. He didn't play for a lot of it because he was hurt. Now, a lot of people say that his injuries aren't related, but he does play a position where it's very easy to get hurt. And it's a risky pick, even at number two. So I think I would still take him at number two. I think the upside that he has, the ceiling that he has, you kind of have to just like take it and trust it. But you're going to be nervous. You're going to be nervous taking him. But I would take the risk, but you need to weigh for yourself if it's worth taking him as basically the second pick, the second overall pick in your draft leagues. Because I think he can do it, but it's definitely going to be risky for sure. But that's why I have him number two, is mainly because of his injury history. If he was healthy, he'd be number one easily. All right, number three, I have Derrick Henry. So Derrick Henry, a lot of people aren't very high on him, similar to Christian McCaffrey because he had an injury last year. But I think we need to think about what he was doing before he got hurt. He played half of the season, so he played the first half. And the pace in which he was setting, if he played the full season at what he was doing in the first half, he would have blown Jonathan Taylor out of the water. Like, he would have done better than Jonathan Taylor. And I think that's saying something because Jonathan Taylor had a great season last year, but Derrick Henry was destroying. Like, he was setting records with how he was playing. And then he got a foot injury. But I think it's important to note what kind of injury he had, because a lot of people freak out when they say, oh man, like he missed half of the season. Just like with Christian McCaffrey, like I'm freaking out because I'm like, man, I don't know if he's still going to be healthy. But with Derrick Henry, the foot injury that he recovered from is called a Jones fracture, which from what I understand is an injury that is not related to anything else. It's kind of like a fluke injury. And there actually have been several players that have fully recovered and done really well from it. Last season, Deebo Samuel, he just came back and had a monster year. He finished in the top 5 of wide receivers. We talked about him. And he just came back from a Jones fracture. He came back from the same injury. And so it's possible. It's possible that a player that experiences that kind of injury can come back just as stronger as ever. And I think Derrick Henry definitely can do that. Now, this was a tricky one for me, mainly because I do play in full PPR leagues, and Derrick Henry doesn't get a lot of catches. And so everything that I just talked about doesn't really apply to Derrick Henry, which is what's so crazy about him, is that even though he doesn't get many receptions, he still finishes in the top 5. He still finishes in the top 2 of running backs for full PPR leagues. And a big reason why I have him at 3 is because I trust his workload. Now, he's not going to be able to do that for much longer, but his team trusts him. His team runs the ball through him. And you know that he's the guy on that team and that he also delivers and that you can feel confident knowing that he is consistent and he's the guy. And while he may not get that upside for catches in a full PPR league, he doesn't need it. I mean, it would be really nice. It'd be really nice if he did, because you would be like, man, like he would get so many more points, but he doesn't even need it, which is what's crazy. Like I'm picking him over other guys that get a lot of catches, which we'll talk about. But I have him at 3 mainly because I feel confident in having him on my team. I've drafted him in several leagues. And it's a really good feeling knowing when Derrick Henry goes off for 30 to 40 points and there's nothing you can do. Like your opponent for that week is just like, man, that's unfair. And that's exactly what he is. He's a cheat code. And so, yeah, I would feel pretty comfortable picking him at number 3. I know not everyone would. In a lot of power rankings, people have Derrick Henry like pretty low, like even at like 6 or 7, which I personally don't understand. But hey, each his own. So next up, I have Austin Ekeler. Now, Austin Ekeler, a lot of people actually have him at 3. So instead of Derrick Henry, they would put him at 3, which I totally understand. I just feel better about Derrick Henry. And a reason for that is because Austin Ekeler had a really good year last year. And he also had a lot of scrimmage yards and he had a lot of rushing touchdowns, which I think is unusual for him. So comparing the two players, Derrick Henry and Austin Ekeler, Derrick Henry is a pure rusher. He's a guy that is going to get you a lot of rushing yards, and he's a guy that's going to get you a lot of rushing touchdowns, but not many catches. He's not really looked to in the passing game. Whereas Austin Ekeler is the complete opposite. He's a guy that gets a lot of catches per game. And he normally isn't a guy that gets a lot of rushing yards. Now, some people may argue with me on that. But he definitely is a lot smaller frame than Derrick Henry. And he's a totally different player. Totally different player. But last year, Austin Ekeler had 94 targets for 70 catches. 70 receptions. So that's 70 extra points. Which is a lot. And he finished as the second best running back in the league. And so I think he deserves it. I totally understand if you would put him at number 3. A reason why I have him at 4 is because they drafted a rookie this season. The Chargers did. They drafted Isaiah Spiller, who I think is a really good running back. And I think he's going to give Austin Ekeler some breaks when it comes to rushing yards and rushing touchdowns. I think Spiller is going to be kind of like a red zone look for them. Now, I think Austin Ekeler is still going to do well. I still believe in him. I think if you get him on your team as your running back number 1, you're going to be really happy. So it's definitely close between Henry and Ekeler. I just have him at 4 because I think I trust Henry more. Ekeler also has injury history. He was able to stay healthy last year, which is really encouraging. But there definitely is a possibility that he gets hurt. But that's the same with any of these guys. Running back is such a fragile position. But I have him at 4. Next up, I have Dalvin Cook. Dalvin Cook is another guy that I would love to have on my team. I think he's going to do really well this year. Reason why I have him at 5 is because that team, the Minnesota Vikings, have so many other weapons that Dalvin Cook doesn't always get every look that goes his way. Whereas these 4 guys, JT, Christian McCaffrey, Derrick Henry, even Austin Ekeler, like their teams kind of go through those guys. Whereas Dalvin Cook, like they have Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, like they need Dalvin Cook. Like it's very helpful that they have him. But if they had like a little weaker running back, I think they still would do fine because they have like Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen. But no, I really like Dalvin Cook. He's another guy that struggles with injury. Last season, he finished as the top 16 running back. And a big part of that is because he missed several games. But the year before, he finished inside, I believe, inside the top 5. And he definitely can get back inside the top 5. I think as long as he stays healthy, he's going to really excel. He has a new head coach, new offense, and a team that I think will definitely use him in the passing game. He's another guy that is pretty lethal in the passing game. And I think that with how their offensive schemes are looking like they're going to work for the Vikings, they definitely are going to use him in that. But he also is just really explosive. Like he's a guy that you'll have like 30, 40, even 50-point fantasy football games. And you're just really glad that he's on your team. I just don't like him as much as the top 4 guys I listed, but I really like him inside the top 5. These 5 players that I just mentioned, I feel really good about. But the next several guys I'm going to talk about, I don't feel as comfortable with. But Dalvin Cook, I feel really good at number 5. All right, next up, I have Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon is a guy that I do like a lot. I have him right outside the top 5, mainly because I personally don't love his game as much as these other guys. I think he is really talented. I think he is really skilled. But I just don't think he's at the level as these top 5 guys that I listed. But I think he's right there. I think he's right on the outside. I think finishing at number 6 is a really good spot for him. And I feel pretty comfortable putting him there. He's on a Cincinnati Bengals team that made the Super Bowl last year. And Joe Mixon was a big part of that. I think if they had a different running back, I don't know if that would change their season. But Joe Mixon had a lot of games last year where he was the guy. They needed him to do well in order for them to win. And you want a guy like that on your fantasy football team. You want a guy that an NFL team needs him to do well in order for them to win, because that means that like the ball has to go through them. Another thing with Joe Mixon that I really like is he is a pass catcher. He'll get 40 catches season, which is great. That's just 40 more points. But he finished as the 4th best running back in full PPR leagues last year. And so I think he's right there again. I think he'll just miss the top 5, but he's a very talented running back who his team is very committed to. And I think you definitely want a guy like that on your team. Next up, I got Najee Harris. Najee Harris finished as the 3rd best running back in PPR leagues, mainly because just like Austin Ekeler, he gets a lot of catches. He had 94 targets with 74 receptions, which is a lot. That is a lot. 74 extra points right there. And just like the guys I've talked about, like his offense goes through him every single time. He had over 300 rushing attempts last year as a rookie, which is a lot for anybody, but as a rookie, they definitely ran him into the ground last year. And that's a big reason why I have him at 7. A lot of people have him higher. They have him inside the top 5. I mean, he finished as the 3rd best running back. So I definitely understand why you would want him in your top 5. But there's rumors that they're going to kind of lower his workload because they don't want to ruin their first round like prize player. They don't want to hurt his stock going into the future. They also don't really have that solid quarterback anymore. Big Ben is gone. It's a new era in Pittsburgh. And so you don't really know who the quarterback's going to be. They're saying that it's going to be Mitch Trubisky, which he's okay. But eventually they're going to change to Kenny Pickett. And so he's going to go through quarterback changes. They're probably going to lower his workload to prevent him from injury. and I don't think the team's going to be very good. All three of those factors kind of puts him at 7 for me. I still like him. I still think he's going to do well. And you want him on your team, obviously, but I probably wouldn't take him in the early rounds of the early first round of your draft. I would take him near the end of the first round, but like if you could get him in the early second, that's a steal. That probably won't happen. Like guys are a lot higher on him than I am. But I wouldn't take him super early in your drafts, but that's just me personally. All right, next up is Alvin Kamara. This one is hard. This one's really hard. Alvin Kamara is a guy who I think is one of the best running backs in the league. I would take him at number 1 or number 2 easily, and I have before when I shouldn't have. But I would take him at top 3 easily if everything was normal, which is not. He is going through a legal situation where he was arrested and charged for battery early this year. And man, that just sucks. It sucks to see that for a player. But basically what that means is that eventually he's going to get suspended. And we don't know how long he's going to get suspended for. We don't know when. His court date keeps getting postponed. And so you're drafting a guy who can be a top 3 running back in the league when he plays. But you're drafting him knowing that he could get suspended. And the situation reminds me a lot of a situation a couple years ago where Le'Veon Bell was the running back for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and he was holding out. He was wanting more money. He was wanting a better contract. And he told everyone, he's like, I'm not going to play until we figure this out. And people thought he was joking. People thought he was like going to play when the season started. And week 1 goes by, doesn't show up. Week 5 goes by, he's not there. And he ends up not playing the whole year. And that was a guy that in fantasy football leagues, you were drafting as like a top 2 running back. I remember that I drafted him hoping that he was going to come back. We didn't know for sure before the season started. And so Alvin Kamara, we don't know what's going to happen. And so the reason why I have him at 8 is because there's a lot of risk with him. If we know for sure that he's going to play the whole year, I would have him in my top 3 easily. But we don't. And so I have him at 8 because if you can get him in kind of the late first round, early second round of your drafts, I would probably take that risk. But if you're the first, second, or third top pick in your fantasy draft and you take him at 3, that could end up really hurting you because the guy that you're going to get in the second round is going to be a lot lesser. And he could end up missing a big chunk of the season. And so that's why I have him at 8. But it's really, really hard because I think that when he's healthy, he's one of the best. He finished as the 8th best running back last year. And the year before that, I believe he finished as the number 1. So it's a risk, but you kind of just have to do your own homework and see how you feel about it. And if you want to go for it, go for it. All right, number 9, I have DeAndre Swift. Swift is running back for the Detroit Lions, and he has a lot of potential, but he's played 2 seasons in the NFL so far, and he hasn't played a full healthy season yet. He has a lot of injuries, but when he's healthy, he definitely is a great player on the field, and he is a big part of that Lions team. That Lions team has not been very good, and so when he's on the field, he makes them a lot better. He's another guy that gets a lot of catches. He had 62 receptions last season, which is a lot for a guy that didn't play the full season. And so just think about, like, if he was healthy, he missed 4 games. So if he was healthy, he'd be over the 70 catch mark, maybe even 80, which is crazy. And so I'm a bit wary of his injury history. That's why I have him at 9. But I think if you can get him as your number 1 running back in the early second round, I think that I would do it. If you can get a top wide receiver late in the first, get him early in the second, I think that's a pretty good team. But that's why I have him at 9, is mainly because of his injuries. All right, next up is Aaron Jones. I really like Aaron Jones. I think he's a really good player. He's on the Packers with Aaron Rodgers, and I think that just boosts his ceiling as well. Now that Devonta Adams has left, I think there's going to be a lot more pass catching opportunities for Jones. He is a really good pass catcher, and he is very explosive. He had a 40-point game, 40-point fantasy game last season. And when that happened, everyone was really glad that he was on their team, and everyone wished he was on their team. But he also had some dud games last year too, which was kind of too bad. He finished as the 11th best running back last year. I think that will continue again. One thing I'm a little weary of is that they're talking about splitting his snaps with AJ Dillon, and I think AJ Dillon is really good as well. And so I think that may eat into Aaron Jones a little bit, but I think he can still finish at number 10, mainly because there's going to be a lot of targets open, and he's a really good pass catcher. So I have him at 10. Next up, I have Ezekiel Elliot at 11. There's a lot of people hating on Zeke, and I don't really understand it. I may be on an island on that one, but a lot of people really complained about his usage and that his snap count and his plays are going down. And basically his efficiency as a running back is trending downwards, starting from last season. And I understand what they're saying. They're worried about that this year is going to be a huge regression. But if you look at the stats and where he's finished, I don't know why you don't take him at around the top 10. I mean, I don't have him inside my top 10. I have him at 11. But last season, he finished as the 7th best running back, even when he didn't do as well as he has before in regards to running back statistics. But he still finished as the 7th best running back in full PPR leagues. And he hasn't finished outside of the top 10 in, I think it's like 5 out of 6 of his seasons. He had one season where he missed like 4 to 6 games, which obviously he was outside the top 10 then. But every time he's played a full season or close to a full season, he's been inside the top 10. And I think he's super consistent. To me, Ezekiel Elliott is like Keenan Allen for running backs. He's very consistent, and the Cowboys are committed to him. I think they're committed to him this year. I know there's talks of them using Tony Pollard, kind of like how the Packers are going to use AJ Dillon. But I think they're going to use Pollard more in a pass catching role because the Cowboys have a lot of wide receiver injuries. And so I think Zeke is still going to be that guy running back. I still think Zeke is a good pass catcher as well. And so I'm excited about him. I know a lot of people aren't for some reason, but if you can get him as your running back number 1 in like the middle of the second round, even late second, early third, I would do it. That's a steal to me. Last year, people were drafting him like as a top 5 fantasy football pick. And what has changed in a year? He finished at 7. So I know people want him to be in top 5, but I still think he's going to do really well this year. All right, next up, I have Leonard Fournette, Playoff Lenny. I like Playoff Lenny. He is kind of funny camp stories though. There was a report that he like showed up to, I think it was OTAs or mini camp, like overweight, and so a lot of people are freaking out because they're like, "Oh my goodness, is he gonna be like Eddie Lacy from the Packers a couple years ago? Like, is he gonna be that cheeseburger Eddie that is just like overweight and doesn't want to get down to shape?" But I think he's getting there. I think he's, from what I've heard, like he's cutting weight, he's getting in shape. I think he's going to be great. I'm excited about him. There are some question marks though. Like recently there was news that Tom Brady is going to take a couple weeks off for personal reasons. We don't fully know what that's about, but obviously if something happens to Tom Brady, that's going to affect, I think it's going to affect the whole team. It may not affect Lenny as much because he's still that running back. The backup running back, Ronald Jones, is not there anymore. And so Leonard Fournette is that guy. And I think he's going to do really well. Last year, he finished as the top 6 running back in full PPR leagues. And so I have him at 12. That's a bit of a drop, but I think it's realistic. I think he was playing really, really well last year. And but I think 12 is realistic. I think he definitely can finish inside the top 10, but I feel more comfortable picking him at 12. All right, next up, I have Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb, I really like him. I think he's a really hard runner, but just like Derrick Henry, he doesn't catch any passes. He is a pure runner, and he normally doesn't get the workload that Derrick Henry does, mainly because they have Kareem Hunt. Now there's reports that Kareem Hunt has requested a trade, and the team denied it. And so who knows what's going to happen with that. I think if something happened to Kareem, that could help Nick Chubb get the full workload. But he also has a hard time staying healthy. And they don't know what is going on at quarterback. Like their quarterback may be suspended for 6 games or even the whole year in Deshaun Watson. And so there's a lot of drama and a lot of problems going on with that team, which make me kind of put Nick Chubb at 13 because I don't feel comfortable with the team. I don't know what's going to happen, but I still think Nick Chubb is a really good player. He finished as the 13th best full PPR running back last year, and I feel pretty good about that again. I think 13 is a pretty good spot for him. Next up at 14, we have Saquon Barkley. Now, Barkley, just like Christian McCaffrey, is a guy that can finish number 1, top 3 running backs in the league. He did that in his rookie season, finished as the number 1 fantasy football running back, and he's a monster. He gets a lot of catches. Now, the problem with him is that he's always hurt. Last 2 seasons, he has struggled with injury. He hasn't played a full season. He finished as the 30th best running back last year. And he's also on a bad team. He's a bad quarterback, in my opinion. But that also can help him. He does get a lot of passes, a lot of dump off passes from Daniel Jones. And I think that'll probably happen again, but he needs to stay healthy. And so I think you can definitely put him higher. I think in regards to rankings, you can rank him higher. I have him at 14 because I'm still worried about his injury history. But if you want to take your shot on him and just say, no, I think he's going to be healthy, I would say go for it. Because if you can get him in the 2nd or 3rd round, that's a steal in my opinion. But I wouldn't take him in the 1st round. I probably wouldn't even take him in the early 2nd. But if he falls to me in like middle of the 2nd, late 2nd round, I would take him for sure. I think that would be a good value. But I am pretty worried about his injury history. At 15, I have James Conner. James Conner is on the Arizona Cardinals, and he did really well last year. He finished as the 5th best running back in full PPR and half PPR. And I like him, but I'm not as high on him as other people. Mainly because a big reason why he finished as a top 5 running back last year is because of how many touchdowns he got. He didn't really get that many rushing yards. He is a pass catcher, but he doesn't get as many catches as some of the other guys I listed, but he got a lot of touchdowns last year. They used him at the goal line, and he was a big reason why they did really well. But I just don't feel super confident with him as my running back number 1. If I could somehow get him as my 2nd running back, sure, I would feel good about it. But the fact that you're relying on him to score touchdowns in order for him to score fantasy points, that's just risky in my opinion. Like I want a guy that is going to get a lot of rushing yards or a lot of receptions. But the fact that he does well because he gets touchdowns, I think that can happen again. But I think it's also risky. And so that's why I have him at 15. I don't feel as confident with him as some of these other guys I listed. Even 10 through 14, I would easily take those guys over James Conner. But some people have James Conner inside their top 10, which I think is pretty bullish. But I feel good about him at 15. All right, last but not least, I have Cam Akers. Now, this spot, I was really looking between Cam Akers and David Montgomery from the Bears for the 16th spot. The reason why I chose Cam Akers is because he's on the Los Angeles Rams, the Super Bowl defending champions, and he's a good running back. He struggled with injury a season ago, he tore his Achilles before the season started. But the fact that he recovered from it and he was able to play in the playoffs and the Super Bowl, that's pretty amazing in my opinion. And so he's fully removed from injury. He's fully healthy, and he is the starter. Like they have even said, like, he's the guy, and he's young, he's talented, he's skilled. I think he's going to do really well for that team. I think he's a great runner, and I feel really good with him at 16. I think he definitely can get near the top 10. I think he can get inside the top 10, but I don't feel super confident with that. But I feel pretty good with around top 15. And if you can get him as your running back number 1 or even running back number 2 in like late second, early third, I'd feel really good about that. And he's even going in like the late third, early fourth. And so if you can get him there, I think that's a good spot. But that's why I have him at 16, mainly because I just don't feel as comfortable with him as these other guys. But I think he's going to do really good for that Rams team. And so let's look at our top 16. This is who I got. I got Jonathan Taylor at number 1, CMC at number 2, King Henry at number 3, Austin Ekeler at number 4, Dalvin Cook, Joe Mixon, Najee Harris, got Alvin Kamara at 8, DeAndre Swift at 9, Aaron Jones, Ezekiel Elliot, Leonard Fournette, Nick Chubb at 13, Saquon Barkley at 14, and then we have James Conner and Cam Akers wrap it up. So that's what I have for my top 16 running backs. Let me know down in the comments who you think is going to be the best running back this season, who you feel the most comfortable with, and let me know what you'd like me to cover in the future. Next episode, we're going to be going over my top tight ends. So stay tuned for that, and I'll see you guys next time.